Okay, so what I want to talk about in this video is going to be cloth. Cloth can be used for a lot of different purposes. We can create a lot of different types of models, whether it be curtains or flags. But to do so, it helps to have a pretty good understanding of the properties that we can work with. So that's what I want to cover before diving in how to do some of the more specific things like flags, like curtains. So let's go ahead and get started. All right. You'll see we have nothing going on here because we're going to start from scratch, at least the beginning here. So I'm going to create a cube. I'm going to create a plane, make that plane a little bit larger, and place it above my cube. Now, the two basic cloth tags that we need, cloth simulation tags, will be found under the simulation tags option or group here. So I can choose cloth for my plane. And for the cube, I want to go back to simulation tags and I want to find collider. So this will make it so that the cloth, or really any of the simulation tags in here, whether it's rope, whether it's balloon, whether it's soft body, will collide or interact with whatever we apply that collider tag to. So now when I hit play, you'll see we have cloth. However, there are not a lot of polygons associated with this cloth. And so just like I mentioned in my soft body video, um, the number of segments we create does influence the way this looks. And so it can be a balancing act between performance, between detail, and really just kind of getting what we want. Now, once again, much like soft body, when we still don't have enough detail or polygons, that's where putting the plane in a subdivision surface can help to really give us something that looks a lot better. And I also want to mention, I believe it's under simulate here, although perhaps they moved it. There's also a cloth surfaces object right here, cloth surface that you can put, say, a plane into. And that's going to do a couple of things. It's going to allow us to subdivide it like we just did. Okay. It seems to be doing some extra stuff as well here. But also, and kind of even more important, is you can add some thickness to this. So that way you can add thickness to your cloth, right, without having to do anything to it. This kind of keeps this procedural. Now we do end up with this kind of hard edge here, though perhaps we could use a bevel deformer. Um, oops, those are effectors. The bevel deformer here to kind of help with that. But this way we're keeping this all procedural. And at any point we could rewind, change some settings and go, keep going. Though we are getting something a little bit different here. But if nothing else, you could keep the subdivisions here at 0, use this for the thickness, and then, not that I would want to do this, put it into a subdivision surface from there to smooth it out. So that's kind of the general overview of cloth. And that can be used to create tablecloths, to create sheets or comforters. And that's the process I would do. Okay. Now, when it comes to the actual properties of cloth, well, here's what I have here. So rather than just kind of tell you what each property does, which I will be doing, I also thought it would be helpful to see what each property does. So that way you have a little bit more of a comparison. Okay. So we have a bendiness of 10 versus 20, 50, and 100. And so the differences may not always be apparent when you first look at it, but once we kind of take a look, we'll start to see that as we increase bendiness, we actually get more detail. Notice there's 2 wrinkles versus 1, almost 3 versus the 2, and kind of so on and so forth. Now, is that the only difference? No. Okay, bendiness should also impact, how they move a little bit, but detail, you're telling me I can get more detail out of the same amount of polygons. Well, then that's definitely something I would be interested in. Okay. Stretchiness, this one's a little bit more straightforward and something that you can visualize a little bit more. That a cloth that is stretchier is going to stretch and be longer. You can see that very obviously here where it gets longer and longer as we increase the stretchiness. Okay. More than that, let's take a look at what this looks like simulated. Okay. Similar type of thing as before, where we actually do get a little bit more detail with this property as well, though maybe not there. So maybe I have those settings a little bit backwards. I don't think I do. Thought I double checked everything. But let's see what we get. So stretchiness of 50, and then this one stretchiness of 70. Let's just kind of confirm. Yep. So um, maybe just the way that it's simulated, the simulation is cached. So playing it really isn't going to make anything different. Could just be the frame, I stopped it on as well. Since as you scrub through this, you can see I have a little bit different look for each one of these as well, depending on what frame I'm on. Bounciness is going to be similar to stretchiness. With this one, though, I want to point out kind of the different scale of values I'm using here. I'm using 10 to 30, whereas with these others, it was very much, 10 to 100. All right. The similar type of thing here. Unfortunately, with bounciness, things get pretty crazy when you go much higher than 30, as you'll see. Actually, turns out 20. You can see that they just kind of freak out and explode and go nuts. Now, so what that means to me is we either have to use a frame very early on in the simulation, okay, or we need to be using much smaller values because even the 15 one I think starts to have some issues. You can see it kind of starting to lose its mind there as well. So just something to think about. It's interesting that they almost keep bounciness at its highest value, as opposed to kind of giving you some room to work with there. Now, when it comes to friction, this is another one that is pretty straightforward. Where the higher the friction, the less it's going to slide or move across another surface. Okay, this could also be itself, could be a collider, and that is something we have in our collider settings as well, both bounce, friction, and stickiness. Stickiness is a bit different. Think of it like friction, but at the same time, it's going to want to stick to itself or to other objects instead of just go slowly. And um, while it isn't quite as apparent here, notice how with 0 it starts to almost roll a little bit, whereas with these the bottom shape kind of changes less and less because it's stickier and sticking more to the surface. Okay, so once again, similar to friction, but it can be nice for getting things to kind of clump together. Target length, okay, allows us to specify what kind of length or size we would want this. And this is something you could definitely animate, and I would recommend animating it, especially if you wanted to do. I've seen it be used to kind of like shrink wrap something, shrink wrap a cloth, on something else, or create that kind of shrink wrap look. Would be to animate the target length property right here, going from 100% to whatever you think it'll need, and that should give you that. But just on its own, it just kind of makes our objects small and almost kind of collapse, almost like they were put inside of a vacuum, which could be kind of cool. Now, what I want to do is talk about how we would create a flag. So I have a flag here, or at least the basic setup of one. I have a cylinder, I have a plane. On the cylinder, I will add my collider tag. On the plane, I will add my cloth tag. Okay. Now, when I hit play, this kind of drops. I also should mention we are going to be working in our project settings here, and I can't remember if, yep, looks like I've already done a little bit of this, but I ended up switching my device from GPU to CPU for simulation. It goes a bit slower, but I found I get a little bit more stability this way. I've also adjusted my gravity, so I will go ahead and reset that, but we will be in here adjusting the gravity here very soon. But right now, we can go back here because with this plane, we don't want it to fall. We want it to stick to our flagpole here. And if the flagpole is not going to move, what we can do is come in and select a couple of rows. All right. Ideally, you do it evenly. So I'll zoom in a little bit, maybe get these first 2 rows since they're kind of inside the flag anyway. Inside the flagpole. Come back here to my cloth tag. come here to the dresser section, and I can choose to fix points. Now, there's a lot more going on here. We'll probably also mention or see initial state, but fix points allows us to take some points here and really kind of remove them from the cloth simulation. Tell them not to be cloth, not to move. And so now when I hit play, you'll see we get our flag. And because it has gravity, notice how it's falling down. Okay. And that's one of the reasons we may want to reduce the gravity is to help get the flag to, not go straight to the ground like that. Now, what we can do is under the simulate menu up here, come here to forces and see if there's any we want to use to help us with our flag. And wouldn't you know it, we have wind. We could also use turbulence. We might. We also have gravity in here as well. Now, having an individual gravity like this would allow you to exclude or include it to different simulations as opposed to having a global gravity. But for now, we'll try wind. And I can hit play. You can see I've made my frame range here quite long so we can see this. And there's not a whole lot going on here. So I'm going to increase my wind speed. Right, maybe a bit more. And I think we're going to need much more than this. So let's do like 300. Okay. And that's starting to help. Maybe I can kind of angle this up as well. Right, maybe a bit more speed to help with this. And once again, this is where lowering the gravity could help. So why don't we give that a shot? Come in here, my project settings, and by lowering gravity, I'm going to make it less negative. See how that kind of raises it up a little bit more. Maybe we rewind it and give this a shot just to see where we're at. Honestly, that's, starting to get pretty good. It's maybe stretching a bit too much. So I could come into my surface and that's probably going to be stretchiness, but we want to be careful with how we adjust the bendiness because we'll probably lose some detail there. We could almost adjust our target length. So maybe I set that to say 80%. Okay, so I end up with something, a little bit shorter there. All right, so that's looking pretty good. Maybe the last thing we do with this wind is we add some turbulence. So I'm not sure what values we'll want to use. Maybe a little bit more. Just do 100% and see what we get. So I feel like I'm seeing it there. But I'm not sure the scale is correct. Let's maybe adjust the frequency. Scale is already quite large, so that's why I didn't want to adjust that right away. But if nothing else, we're starting to get something. Let's maybe make this a bit larger for that. And that's starting to look a little bit better. I actually have had better luck using the frequency force. I'm sorry, the turbulence force. So increase the strength there, increase the scale. And you can see right away how that really starts making this go a bit crazy. So the strength, can turn it back down. Maybe rewind this if necessary. And there we go. Now, one thing you'll notice with this flag is that it does start kind of like a boring, well, not from that angle, a boring kind of flat plane. In fact, why don't we turn the wind so it's kind of going there we go. The direction the flag is going. So it takes a while for the flag to get going, for it to be in a relatively natural looking position. And what we could do to help speed that up is set an initial state. So once I find a frame that looks pretty good, maybe something like that, what I can do is in my cloth tag, come back here to the dresser section and then choose initial state set. That means my simulation will now start with the cloth in this particular position. So if I rewind this, that's what we see. It doesn't change. So what we'll get is fewer frames where the cloth simulation is not usable, where, it's still doing, it doesn't have to fall into place quite as much. You can see it's actually wrapping around that where with the way I currently have it. So maybe rotating this wind back that way might help. Hey, but hey, a flag wrapping around a pole is, something I've seen before. Now, I'm still not 100% happy with how much, movement we're getting here. So there's still some work to do here, but just to kind of finish this up, I could take my plane, put it in a subdivision surface, and that can give it just a little bit more detail here. Okay. So there we have a flag. Okay. Next up are curtains. Now, curtains require a little bit of setup here. So we have kind of a finished version. Well, not quite finished on the right, but we'll go through and set this up on the left here. I'm not sure. Oh, I see why. So what we're going to need to do is create two objects here, a curtain object, our cloth object, and a belt object, something that will be able to kind of parent part of our cloth to it. So it's similar to fixed points, but we are going to be fixing points to a specific object. Okay. It's important for both of these objects to be editable for this process, just like it was for the flag to be able to fix the points. But what I can do is on my curtain, add simulation and cloth. And then I also want to add under simulation the cloth belt. Okay. Now to assign the belt, what I need to do is tell it what object is the belt is going to be on, and that is this cube right above it. Okay. And then go in, make sure you have a selection of points and choose set. Okay. And the order is important here. And if you've done everything right, you will see these lines as they get connected to our cube here. And so now what happens when we hit play, okay, is we should see this go. All right. Now it's going pretty slow for a number of reasons. Specifically, I got some more advanced curtains in here. So why don't we see? Can I just disable? Not seeing it. Cache mode. Yeah, we'll just delete it. That should play back a little bit quicker. There we go. And yeah, there you have it. We have some curtains. Now, these certainly leave something to be desired detail wise. And that's where those properties we talked about before can help, whether it's bendiness, stretchiness, we can increase, bounciness, we need to be a bit careful of, right? And really, those are going to be the big ones. And so, even that, you may be going, well, that doesn't have quite as much detail as you want. And that's where, once again, the number of polygons matters. You can see we don't have that many in here. So, I'm going to have to remake this really quick so that I can add more polygons. I'll go into polygon mode here, go to mesh, add, and then subdivide. And let's see, I think one ought to be enough. Let's do one more just to be safe. Okay. A lot more polygons probably will mean a slower render. And I actually kind of like that. It tried to keep that same selection of the top row I had previously, but it did every, fourth one. So that will allow these to kind of sync a little bit and perhaps look more like curtains. So same process as before, simulation cloth, simulation cloth belt, drag the belt object in there, go into point mode and hit set. Okay. Can hit play. Like I said, this is definitely going to be slower, but as you can see, we are getting a lot more detail here. Okay. And maybe should have a few more selected since it's looking like it's getting stretched a bit too far here. Now these curtains are moving very, very fast. 60 frames to go that distance or 2 seconds is a lot, but you can see just how much more detail we're getting. Okay. Now I wanted to show you one other thing, so I'm going to have to revert this scene here to do that. And that is, something a little bit different. Previously I showed how we could set initial state, but what if our initial state was something we modeled and started more detail with? And all I did to create this was actually just go into, say, a top view here, pen tool out, something like this. Literally all I did. Switch the interpolation to soft and throw this into an extrude. Okay, before. Right, so there's kind of the vertical part of this. and then adding subdivisions to get the horizontal segments I want. And the only other thing I did geometry wise here was switch the intermediate point type in our spline from adaptive to uniform so that these are evenly spaced. Okay. But this is the end result of that. And this should be cached, though I don't think the playback is going to be amazing. But you can see how that gives us something that looks even more natural. And so, honestly, I could almost start with a frame, like this is my initial state, and then resimulate this. Though you do have to be careful about using an initial state with the cloth belt. I would actually want this to not be animated or to set the initial state before it starts moving. So maybe instead of have this go from 0 to 120, because I did slow this one down, maybe have it start at 120 and then go to 240 and give myself 120 frames for this to kind of settle, and then use that as my initial state for simulating. Okay. One last thing about cloth, I touched on it, but I want to make sure I go into it just a bit more, is that we have the ability to cache cloth, and that stores the animation, the simulation information in your file. It can make it a lot larger. I think this file is actually over a gigabyte because of all the information it's storing about all these different points for every single frame in my frame range here. But this will give you faster playback. It will also allow you to render on a render farm. And honestly, you really should be caching any simulations before rendering, even on your own machine. And you really have two separate ways of caching. If you hit calculate cache here, it will cache just a single object, whereas you can also cache an entire scene. And so if you have many objects, that will go through and cache all of them. So while not completely exhaustive, since I didn't get into balloon, mixed animation, or plastic deformation, those are more advanced topics that perhaps I will cover in a later video. Let me know if that's something you would like to see. But I think that will do it. So that will do it for this video. Let me know if there's anything else you would like to see, and take care.